Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muluanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Ghana, Stitcher Radio, Himalaya, wherever you find your podcast. We'd also be so grateful if you could tell your family and friends all about the show. Our guest today is Lorelei Savaryn. She'll be here to celebrate the edge of in between. Before we invite Lorelei to join us here in the studio, we want to invite you to join us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Reading With Your Kids on TikTok, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. We also have a fantastic Pinterest page. A lot of real great content up on our Pinterest page. And speaking of great content, you absolutely want to sign up for our free newsletter. You can do that at readingwithyourkids.com. We're so proud. Our newsletter just got revamped. Every month we're going to feature a great author profile. This month we profile our Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, Jennifer Swanson. We also let you know what's coming up on the show, what you might have missed. There's also a great do-it-together project, how you can make dinosaur footprint cookies. Ooh, yummy and delicious and really fun. Learn all about that and more at readingwithyourkids.com. Oh, also, there's a contact button at the top of the page. You can use that button to let us know what you love about the podcast, let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Join us right now from the windy and so very, very hot city of Chicago. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new middle grade book. It's called The Edge of In Between. Please welcome to the show, Lorelei Savaryn. Hey, Lorelei, how are you?
Hi, I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really glad that you're here. I hope we can help you cool off a little bit. You were telling me that it's, as we would say in Boston, it's like wicked hot in Chicago today.
It is so hot. It's going to be hot for most of the week, kind of like a heat advisory. So I'm definitely inside in air conditioning right now. It's very warm.
Would this be a good writing day for you? This kind of let me just chill in my room and get into my brain and get some ideas onto the page?
I did get a couple hours in this afternoon, but I do have 4 kids home for the summer. So that makes things a little dicey when the babysitter is unavailable, like she is.
Now, on those days when the kids are there and you are able to get a couple of hours writing in, do you get to the end of the summer and you pick up that writing and say, oh, yeah, the kids are home and the babysitter wasn't here and this is useless. I'm just going to throw this away.
Yeah, there is a small amount of and just increased awareness on my end when they're home and I'm responsible for them. So I can't sink as fully into the world as I maybe can when they're all off or when the babysitter takes them to the park or when my husband's taking care of them. There's definitely I'm still aware of what's going on in the house. So that probably makes my progress a bit slower for sure.
Well, it's certainly what you're supposed to be aware of.
Yes.
you don't want to be fully engulfed, engrossed in an imaginary world while your kids are wreaking havoc.
Yes, exactly. I've always got that mom sense going. It's actually, if it's too quiet, that's a warning sign for me too.
That is a warning sign, isn't it? It's been a while since my kids were underfoot. But I do remember those days where it's like, whoa, it is way too quiet. Let me see what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's going on in The Edge of In Between?
Yes. So The Edge of In Between is a spooky, magical retelling of The Secret Garden. In short. But in a little bit longer format, my main character, Lottie, is orphaned very early on in the story. But prior to that, well, she has to be kind of because it's a Secret Garden retelling. But prior to that, she's had this beautiful, charmed life. She has this magic glowing inside her. She can see the magic in all the people around her. Her family is wonderful. But when she is orphaned, she becomes what's known as one of the living gray. And those are people whose magic has faded and who literally the color has drained from their world. So they are gray. They see the world in shades of gray. And that's a real shock to her because she is a painter and she loves color. And all of this just fades. And she ends up moving in with her uncle who lives in a place called the In-Between, which is in essence the land of the dead. It's where the ghosts of people who have died traverse on their way to the mountains of ever after. And when she goes there, she thinks that maybe she can be reunited with the ghosts of her parents, but she also finds on her uncle's estate that there's this walled off garden without a door, and she peeks through it and she finds that the garden has been entirely encased in ice, like it was frozen in the middle of dying. And she decides she wants to get in that garden. And once she is there, she learns that magic faded maybe isn't necessarily magic lost forever, and that maybe she can find her way back to hope and healing and magic again.
Wow. I don't know if it's because I'm almost 100 years old, but that's terrifying. that scenario where you lose your color and you become gray and you're caught in this in-between world and looking at a frozen garden. It's absolutely something that I would have loved reading when I was in 8th grade.
Yeah, it's I love making things a little bit spooky. My third book's probably a little closer to middle grade horror. This is probably more just middle grade spooky, but I think that I loved those stories as a kid, and I love how sometimes experiencing something that's kind of scary inside the world of a book can maybe teach us what it means to be brave and can help us see a character learn how to become brave and overcome really hard things, and that can help us when we have to be brave in our own lives. But it's also, particularly in this world, this whole story is really a metaphor for what it's like to walk the path of grief. And I really wanted to write something that hopefully young readers could relate to. Everyone loses people, especially in the past few years. There's been more loss than maybe in other times. And I wanted to write something that lets kids know it's okay to be where they're at, even if it's not a super happy place or even if they're struggling, but also for them to leave the story knowing that it will not always feel as hard as it feels today, and that there will be brighter tomorrows, and that there are things to hope for and to look forward to. So it's kind of all that mixed together, like a metaphor for grief, but a little bit of spookiness, and a lot of atmosphere, in this too.
Yeah. I think you made a really good point that kids are experiencing a lot of grief. All kids have to experience grief, but the past couple of years have been especially hard. And I think one of the things that might have made it much harder for kids in the past couple of years is that everybody else has been going through this. It's not like, oh, I lost my dog or I lost my grandmother, and the people in my immediate family, we're grieving, but my teachers are okay and my classmates are okay and my extended family, they're sad, but they're okay and they can help prop me up. It's like, no, we're all kind of going through this right now.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I had the idea and I was working on this story before even COVID hit, but then I was revising it in the fall of 2020. And so it kind of gave it a new depth and a new sense of maybe layers for me to want to make sure that I got this right so that it would be a story that kids could find comfort in and could carry with them if and when down the line, they experienced it if they hadn't already, or where they could feel seen and maybe not I didn't want to prescribe for kids what grief has to look like. Mm-hmm. I wanted to make sure that the story was very clear that everyone was kind of on their own journey, but I also wanted there to be enough in there that they could find something to relate to and to see a bit of themselves in, and to know that it's okay if you're mad today. It's okay if you're just really down today and don't feel like doing the things you usually love, but then also to just watch the characters go through and to be oh, and then this happens and they did want to play today, and the color, kind of came back to them by the end, so that they could at least know that that was coming and that that was a possibility for them too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it was a weighty project.
Yeah. Well, I bet. Well, I'm going to ask you how you changed as you were writing this. But before we do, you talked about being angry. And I think that's an important thing. We talk a lot about how really a lot of really young kids, they turn every disappointment, every feeling that they're uncomfortable with into anger. And it's important for us to help them learn how to really identify what it is that they're feeling. But I think another thing that happens, and I remember a time in my life when I was really grieving, but it was really important for me to be able to understand that in addition to being sad, I was really angry that this was happening at that point in my life. And I think that that's something that's important too for our kids, for us to help our kids and for ourselves to know that, this is sad, it's tragic, and boy, it really, really makes me angry.
Yeah. And that's just a really normal part of the cycle, and it can come and go, and you won't always feel as mad as you feel right now. That, that feelings change over time. That was kind of one of the things I really wanted to get right. And all the characters and their different journeys and I do have characters along different spots on that journey as well. But just knowing that like your feelings change, but that your trajectory in the long run is going to be, you're going to be okay. Even if you don't want to talk about that or even think about that you're going to be okay today, that's okay too. But that's there waiting for you when you're ready.
Yeah. So every time we go through an experience, we learn and we grow from it. And I think that we all grow from reading books and experiencing the book. But I think an author, because an author is experiencing a book for years, sometimes, that there's a lot of growth and change that they live with and live through. How did you change as you were writing The Edge of In Between?
That's a wonderful question. This was a huge growth book for me on many levels. This was a part of a 2-book deal. So I sold my debut and this one I sold just on pitch as part of the same deal. So I hadn't written any pages for this story when my editor bought it. So it was a very different experience from my first book, having written The Circus of Stolen Dreams on my own time, not even sure if I'd get an agent, not even sure if I'd get a book deal, to all of a sudden knowing that the thing I was writing was already on contract, already had a deadline. And then, to be honest, I didn't get it right away. I turned in a couple drafts to my editor, and there was a problem at the core of it. And in order to fix that problem, I had to start over at one point, and I had about a month to fix it and to get it right. And so that was a different kind of pressure, and just like a lot of self-doubt and a lot of anxiety, and wondering if the first book was that the only book, like, am I not going to be able to repeat what I did again? Like, am I a one-hit wonder kind of a thing? And all of that self-doubt and anxiety. And so I learned as an author that I can do really hard things, and I can start over if I have to, and I can work on something until I get it right. And I can keep moving forward even when I'm really scared or not even really confident that I have what it takes, and I can come out on the other side and end up with something I'm really proud of. And that's changed me a lot, because right now I'm working on my 3rd book, which is called The Night Train, and I'm revising it this summer. And those voices, I think, are always still kind of there in an author's head, like kind of like, I don't know, can you do this? But it's just much quieter this time. I feel like I know that I can do this, and I can write about topics that are really tough, but that kids need to see in stories. And I can do them justice. And I just have a lot more trust in myself. And I also just have the experience of writing under contract now, a little bit more under my belt. So I just know what it feels like. And I'm just a lot more generally like calm about letting the process be what it has to be.
What you're describing is something that I've heard bands and musicians talk a little bit about, that sophomore slump or challenge. And, it's like they get their first hit and everyone goes, wow, that's great. And they don't realize that I've been working on this first album for about 10 years and now I have 6 months to get the second one out there. And that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty common. A lot of authors I've talked to have talked about how hard the second book is. And I went into it feeling really confident. So it really shocked me when it was as hard as it was. I was like, I'm going to be fine. I've worked under high pressure situations before, but it was just really different. And I couldn't really know what that felt like until I did it. But then I was so glad that I did all that hard stuff and that I started over, because the story is so much of what I wanted it to be today. So it was all really worth it. But yeah, that second book is a beast, and I'm really, really glad that I did it, and I'm on to the third now.
Awesome. I'm wondering how I would react if I turned in a book that I wrote, and I'm an artist and I'm a writer and this is my creation, and then have an editor say, no, this is wrong. I'm like, what do you mean it's wrong? I wrote it. I'm the boss of this. And it's like, oh no, I sold this. I'm not anymore.
Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic. I have been very fortunate. My editor is wonderful. I've had the same editor so far for all three, which is also I've been very lucky in that regard. And she really understands what I'm trying to do. And the core issue that was the problem was actually in earlier drafts. I had my main character, Lottie's parents were kind of not great parents. That was sort of a holdover from the original Secret Garden, because Mary Lennox's parents aren't that great. So you don't really sympathize with them very much, but it made what I was trying to do with the process of grief really, really tough if they weren't really wonderful parents. So I had to go back and I had to change that, and they had to be wonderful. In order for me to be able to tell the story I needed to tell and have Lottie walk the journey she needed to walk. So it was scary, but my editor kept kind of circling back to some of the issues, and it all came back to that core. And once I realized that, I shot over a revision plan, and I was like, what do you think if I do this? And she was like, yes, go for it. And then it was full speed ahead, green lights to the end. It was good.
Excellent. Is there a little bit of Lorelei and Lottie?
Absolutely. I think there's always a little bit of us as authors in parts of our stories. Our family had a grief experience in 2018 that really rocked our whole family. So I think that processing and that journey is still very much inside me and something I'm wrestling with. But also 12-year-old Lorelei also first experienced the loss that she remembers. My great grandma died when I was 12 years old. And that's the first loss that I remember, and that impacted me, because I would sit with her and I would talk with her, and we just had a really lovely relationship. And I remember understanding what loss was at that point when I lost her. And so there was a bit of me writing for her too, for that 12-year-old me, and knowing that kids that age, that there is kind of a transition. You can understand loss differently, and maybe at a deeper level or more profound level kind of process things. So absolutely. But there's also little bits of other people in my life too. Lottie loves to paint, and I have a daughter who loves painting. So there's, little fun things. My other daughter loves baking, and there's a bake shop with, in my world of my story, with her name, as the name of the bake shop. So there's little,
very cool
odds of the hat.
Well, that's one of the neat things about being a writer or having a podcast. Is I want to do this, and I can figure out a way to do it and make it work in my book, and kind of pay tribute and give a little tip of the cap to people in our lives that we love.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And to wrestle with, I really think about a lot of, I have, 4 kids. So I think, what are the messages that I want my kids to carry with them as they grow up and go through that age where they're, transitioning and about to become teenagers? And what are the things that I really want to pass to them? And those things kind of are the guideposts for the themes of the stories that I gravitate towards as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Going back to this idea of grief, I'm really happy that I think, it's not universal, but I think we're better at allowing or helping our kids to experience grief. When I was growing up, we didn't. You know, I remember when I was 7 or 8 or 10 years old, a neighbor drowned, and it was just, you know, everybody in the neighborhood was just like, yeah, that happened, but we're not talking about it. Over.
Yeah.
You know, and the kids in the neighborhood would get together like, hey, did you hear anything? Did you hear anything? And we were kind of there struggling with it ourselves. And I'm glad now that I know myself, you know, my kids, we started including them in attending funerals and wakes when they were very young, because it was like, hey, kid, this is part of life and we have to kind of deal with it.
Yeah, there's a scene in my book where my main character, Lottie, she's in the garden with her cousin and then this other boy, Timmy, who's a ghost who resides in the garden. And she is kind of overcome with emotion, and she feels like she's going to start to cry, but she's worried if she starts to cry that the garden that started to come back to life is going to freeze over again, that like her tears are going to hurt the garden and cause it to freeze. But she cries, and when she finishes crying, she looks at her feet, and where all of her tears fell, it's turned into all these beautiful forget-me-not flowers. And her tears actually helped the garden to heal and to kind of come back to life. And there's a whole like just little bit about how like there are different kinds of tears, and that sometimes we need to have our tears, and that can be a really, really good and important thing. So I relate to what you said as a parent, just that like part of my messaging is like that this process is all okay. Mm-hmm. Like whatever kids are feeling, that it's okay to have those feelings and that they are valid as anything. Yeah. But that's one of my favorite scenes in the book.
That sounds neat. You shared with us that your editor initially said, nah, you're going the wrong direction here. Was there any time while you were writing this that you got to a point and you said, no, I don't want to go down that road there? It's tempting as a writer. That might be fun. That might add something, but it's a little bit too creepy for me to kind of address.
So I think the one thing that I really, really wanted to be careful about was I didn't want to make the solution to the book be that Lottie had to be like through her grief, like that she had to stop grieving. And that was really tricky because the house in the in-between is kind of powered by sorrow. And it's headed into a not very good place, but it's kind of using the sorrow of the people that are there and feeding off of it. But I had to make it that she could solve the problem without saying that she didn't have to feel sad anymore. Mm-hmm. That was like one boundary that I set like really early on, was I had to find a different way around it, because I didn't want to say you have to like not be sad anymore, to solve your problems. Mm-hmm. So there was that. And then there's one moment that maybe is like fairly creepy, but I felt like it was justified, given the fact that the person who it involves was using kind of their grief against them. And so she deserved to kind of be seen as the enemy in that moment. So it was okay and made it really triumphant when she's defeated later.
Awesome.
Yeah.
This sounds like a really fantastic book for kids, but not only for kids, but we really encourage here in the Reading with Your Kids podcast, we really encourage families to experience books together, TV shows together, movies together. It's so much fun. It's so much fun to sit down and talk. And I think that The Edge of In Between would be just perfect, a perfect co-read for a family to come together at dinner time or in the van and just talk about what's going on.
Yes. I have had several parents reach out to me and say they're reading the book with their kids. It's available in hardback and ebook, and also as an audiobook. So you can listen to it, you can read it. It could open some beautiful discussions with families, and it's also just a lot of fun too. Like I know I talk a lot about the grief aspect just because it's a really important theme, but there's also a lot of really whimsical magic in there, and a garden coming back to life that has magical elements to it. So there's a lot of really fun magic that will keep it like, light enough and like afloat to balance out any of the more serious topics. But I've heard from parents that they've had some, it's wanted it to do.
Awesome. Well, you kind of broke up there, but I heard you say that you have a lot of parents have told you that it's just a wonderful experience to read or to listen to together. I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about the Edge of In Between and find out more about you.
Yes. So the Edge of In Between is available wherever books are sold. Many independent bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can also learn more about me, LoreleiSavaryn.com. I am on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Awesome.
So you can find me pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, and we want to encourage you to support your local and indie bookshops. Give them a call. Just ask, hey, do you have The Edge of In Between by Lorelei Savaryn? If they say no, just ask nicely, and they'll get it there in a day or two.
Yes, absolutely. I own a small pop-up children's bookstore, and I can attest to the fact that we can order anything that is in print pretty much. So
Awesome. We've had a really fun time speaking to the author of The Edge of In Between, a great middle grade novel by our guest, Lorelei Savaryn. Hey, Lorelei, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. This was such a wonderful chat.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Cassie Diadio. She'll be here to celebrate her debut picture book. It's called Riley and Milo. Cassie is a school counselor. In addition to being an author, she's a school counselor. She gives us great insight in how we can best support our kids and also how we can keep our kids safe. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, if you're the author of a fantastic children's book, please be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com. Click in the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to find out how you can be a guest here on the podcast, to find out how you can submit your book to our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read panel, and also find out how you can take part in our monthly promotion program and have your book celebrated through commercials on the podcast, messages to our 70,000 plus social media followers, and also display your book in our network of digital pedestrian billboards. We have billboards all over the country. It's amazing. What a time we live in. Check that all out at readingwithyourkids.com. You can click on that Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to learn all about that and more. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Please, of course, we want to thank our guest, Lorelei Savaryn. Please be sure to check out The Edge of In Between. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Belcastro, Ashley Contreras, Mirabella Q, Rain Penn. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.